Margaret stood in the empty driveway of what used to be her home for 43 years, clutching discharge papers from Cedar Grove Hospital. The sold sign swayed gently in the autumn breeze, a cruel reminder of what her children had done while she recovered from her heart attack. She'd raised them in this very house, worked 2 jobs to put them through college, kept every secret within these walls, including one that would change everything. As she watched the new owners shuffle boxes through her front door, her trembling fingers traced the small key she'd kept hidden in her grandmother's locket for decades. What would her children say when they discovered that the house they sold for a mere $400,000 held a secret worth 5 times that amount? But will this revelation tear her family apart, or bring them closer than ever before? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The taxi pulled away, leaving Margaret alone on the sidewalk. Her fingers trembled as she reached into her worn leather purse, retrieving a small blue album that had survived her hospital stay. The morning sun cast long shadows across its weathered cover, the gold lettering barely visible. Our Family Memories, 1980-2000. Inside the local diner where she'd spent countless mornings as a waitress, Margaret found her usual booth. Sally, who'd served coffee here for the past decade, didn't ask why Margaret's eyes were rimmed red, or why she sat alone instead of with her usual Sunday morning company, her children. Just coffee today, Margaret? Sally's voice carried the gentle concern of a friend who sensed something wasn't right. Yes, dear, and perhaps a moment of peace. Margaret's fingers traced the album's edges, remembering how she'd carefully preserved every milestone within its pages. Opening it, she found herself staring at a photograph from 25 years ago, Michael's high school graduation. Her eldest, so proud in his valedictorian robes, stood tall beside her. Sarah, then 15, beamed with braces, while 12-year-old James pulled a face that somehow made it into their formal family portrait. The memories flooded back, working double shifts at the diner and taking night classes in bookkeeping to go make ends meet after Thomas, their father, left them for his secretary. She'd never let the children see her cry, though there were nights when the weight of single parenthood felt unbearable. Michael had always been the responsible one, stepping into a father figure role far too early. Even as a teenager, he'd help with James's homework and make sure Sarah got to her dance recitals when Margaret was stuck at work. His acceptance to the State University's accounting program had been a moment of pure triumph, the first step toward the better life she'd always wanted for them. Sarah, her middle child, inherited Margaret's determination. While other teenagers spent weekends at the mall, Sarah buried herself in law books, dreaming of becoming an attorney. Margaret remembered selling her mother's antique brooch to pay for Sarah's LSAT prep course, a secret she'd kept all these years. And James, her sensitive soul, who saw beauty in everything. His art teachers praised his talent, but Margaret had worried about his future. Unlike his siblings, James struggled to find his path. His paintings captured emotions Margaret couldn't express. The loneliness of empty chairs at the dinner table, the warmth of Sunday morning pancakes, the shadows of absence in family portraits. The album's pages turned to Christmas 1995. They'd had so little that year, but the photo showed 3 beaming faces around a modest tree. Margaret had worked overtime for months to afford the used laptop for Michael's college applications, the art supplies for James, and the leather briefcase Sarah had eyed in the downtown shop window, dreaming of her future courtroom victories. More coffee? Sally's voice pulled Margaret from her reverie. No, thank you. Margaret closed the album, her throat tight. The children in those photographs had grown into strangers who could sell their childhood home while their mother recovered from a heart attack. Michael, now a successful accountant with his own firm, had always emphasized practical decisions. Was this his idea? Sarah's legal expertise would have made the sale possible. Her knowledge of power of attorney, a double-edged sword. And James, did he even try to stop them? The irony wasn't lost on Margaret. She'd spent decades protecting them from hardship, building their futures brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. Now, they thought they were protecting her from medical bills, from the burden of property taxes, from the responsibilities of home ownership at her age. They didn't understand that the house held more than memories. Her grandmother's words echoed from decades ago. Sometimes, Margaret, love means keeping secrets until the right moment. The key in her locket felt heavier now, its significance magnified by her children's actions. The fortune hidden within those walls wasn't just money. It was her last lesson in love, trust, and the true meaning of family. Rising from the booth, Margaret left a generous tip for Sally. She'd learned long ago that kindness, like karma, had a way of coming full circle. As she stepped into the autumn morning, her resolve strengthened. The time for secrets was ending, but first her children needed to understand the cost of their decisions. She pulled out her phone, another gift from Michael, who insisted she stay connected, and typed a simple message to her 3 children. "Meet me at Carlton's coffee shop tomorrow at 10 a.m. We need to talk about the house, and everything else you don't know." Carlton's coffee shop hadn't changed in 30 years. Same worn leather booths, same brass bells on the door, same aroma of fresh-baked muffins and morning coffee. Margaret arrived early, selecting a corner booth that could accommodate 4. She placed her grandmother's expandable file folder on the table, its contents carefully organized the night before. Michael arrived first, precisely on time as always. His charcoal suit and sterling cufflinks spoke of success, but the shadows under his eyes betrayed his sleepless nights. Sarah swept in moments later, her high heels clicking against the tile floor, legal briefcase in hand as if heading to court. James slipped in last, paint stains on his jacket sleeve, his artistic soul visible in the way he avoided direct eye contact. "Mom," Michael started, his accountant's voice steady but uncertain. "You're looking better. How are you feeling?" Margaret slowly unfolded the house sale contract she'd obtained from the county records office. "Well enough to ask why my children sold my home without my permission." She laid the document on the table, her finger resting on the signatures. "Though apparently, according to this, I did give permission. Sarah, would you care to explain how that happened?" Sarah's professional composure flickered. "Mom, we had power of attorney for medical decisions. Your heart attack. The doctors weren't sure." She swallowed hard. "We had to act quickly. The medical bills were mounting and the house was just sitting there, empty." "Just sitting there?" Margaret's voice remained calm, but her eyes held decades of disappointment. "That house held every Christmas morning, every birthday party, every moment of our lives together. And you sold it for $400,000 without even asking me?" "It was my idea," Michael interjected, protective of his younger sister. "The property taxes were rising, maintenance costs increasing. We couldn't bear the thought of you working anymore, not after the heart attack. The sale would cover your medical bills and provide for your future care." James, who had been studying the patterns in his coffee, finally spoke. "I told them we should wait." His artist's sensitivity caught the pain in Margaret's expression. "But Michael showed us the numbers, and Sarah said we had legal authority, and I just didn't fight hard enough." Margaret pulled out another document from her folder, her latest medical bill. "Did any of you actually read my insurance paperwork? The coverage from my bookkeeping job paid for 90% of the hospital stay. Those mounting medical bills you were so worried about? Less than $5,000 remaining." The silence that followed was heavy with realization. Sarah's legal expertise hadn't extended to reading the fine print of her mother's insurance policy. Michael's financial acumen had failed to account for existing coverage. James's quiet protests had been too easily dismissed. "But that's not really why you sold the house, is it?" Margaret's voice softened. "Each of you had your own reasons. Michael, would you like to tell me about the gambling debts? Or should I show everyone the collection notices I found in the mailbox?" Michael's face paled. His siblings turned to him in shock. "Sarah, shall we discuss the impending collapse of your law firm? The one you remortgaged your condo to keep afloat?" Margaret pulled out a newspaper clipping about recent law firm bankruptcies. Sarah's professional facade cracked. "How did you—" "And James," Margaret turned to her youngest. "The rehabilitation program receipts in your studio told their own story. 3 attempts this year alone." James buried his face in his hands. "Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. The house sale wasn't about protecting me," Margaret continued, her voice gentle but firm. "It was about protecting yourselves. You needed money, and you convinced yourselves that selling my home was the right thing to do, the noble thing to do." The breakfast crowd's chatter filled the silence between them. A waitress refilled their cups pretending not to notice the tension at the table. "What happens now?" Michael asked, his voice hollow. Margaret gathered the documents back into her folder. "Now, you all come with me. It's time you learned about the other secret I've been keeping. The one that would have solved all your problems, if you'd just trusted me enough to ask for help." She stood, leaving enough cash to cover their untouched breakfast. "Meet me at the house in an hour. The new owners agreed to let me collect some final belongings. And children?" She paused, looking at each of them in turn. Sometimes the biggest mistakes lead to the most important discoveries. As they watched their mother leave the coffee shop, none of them noticed her hand move to the locket around her neck, where a small key waited to unlock more than just their financial salvation. It would unlock the truth about family, trust, and the real inheritance their grandmother had left behind. The autumn wind rustled through the maple trees lining Cedar Street as Margaret's children pulled up to their former home. She was already there, standing on the porch she'd swept 10,000 times, waiting with a small leather-bound book in her hands. The new owners, a young couple named the Richardsons, had been surprisingly understanding when Margaret explained she needed one last hour in her old home. "Your grandmother's diary." Sarah recognized the book immediately. As a child, she'd often seen Margaret reading it late at night, but had never been allowed to peek inside. "Come," Margaret said, leading them through the front door. The house felt different now. Boxes stacked in corners, unfamiliar furniture, the walls stripped of 40 years of family photographs. She guided them upstairs to what had been her bedroom, now empty except for a few moving boxes labeled Master BR. Michael cleared his throat. "Mom, about what you said at the coffee shop." "Shh." Margaret opened the diary, its pages yellowed with age. "First, you need to understand where our story really began. Sit down, please." They found spots on the floor, like children gathering for a bedtime story. Margaret settled onto the window seat, her favorite reading spot for 4 decades, and began to read. June 15th, 1980. "My dearest Margaret," she started, her voice taking on the warm tones of her grandmother Rose. "Today I made a decision that will echo through generations. The money from Herbert's railroad pension isn't just money, it's a test, a lesson, and a gift. But timing is everything, my dear. A fortune given too soon becomes a curse. Given at the right moment, it becomes salvation." James leaned forward. "Railroad pension? I thought Great-Grandpa Herbert was a factory worker." Margaret smiled. "That's what we all thought. Your great-grandmother Rose was very good at keeping secrets." She turned another page. "I've watched you raise those children alone, Margaret. Such strength, such grace. Thomas leaving was a blessing in disguise. It showed you your own power. But I see storms coming for your children. Storms they'll need to weather on their own before they're ready for what I've left behind." Sarah's legal mind was racing. "Are you saying Great-Grandma Rose predicted we'd have problems?" "No." Margaret shook her head. She understood human nature. Money has a way of revealing who people truly are. She wanted you to become who you are without the cushion of wealth. Just as she did for me. Michael's accountant instincts kicked in. "How much money are we talking about?" Margaret ignored the question, continuing to read. "The safe is hidden where love builds its nest. In the room where dreams take flight, beneath the boards where little feet once pattered. There's more than just money waiting. There's truth, Margaret. Truth about our family, about sacrifice, about what it means to protect those we love, sometimes even from themselves." The siblings exchanged glances. James spoke first, his artist's imagination catching fire. "The room where dreams take flight. That was my old bedroom, the one I used to paint in. The boards that always creaked," Sarah remembered. "By the window." Margaret closed the diary. Rose knew what she was doing. She chose that spot because it was where James used to sit for hours, drawing birds in flight, where Sarah practiced her debate speeches, where Michael taught himself accounting using old textbooks. She watched you all grow, even in her final years. "But why keep it secret for so long?" Michael asked. "If there was money that could have helped us." "Because," Margaret interrupted, her voice firm, "some lessons can't be taught. They must be lived." Rose understood that wealth without wisdom becomes a poison. She watched it happen in her own family. Herbert's siblings tearing each other apart over inheritance, cousins ruined by trust funds. She stood, walking to the familiar spot by the window. The house you sold so hastily? It was never just a house. It was a vault, holding not just money, but our family's legacy. Rose left specific instructions. The inheritance could only be revealed when it would serve as redemption, not destruction. James ran his fingers along the floorboards. Is that why you didn't stop us from selling? You knew about this all along? Margaret touched her locket. I knew about the money. Yes, but I needed to see what you would do, how you would handle what you thought was a crisis, whether you would come together or fall apart. You tested us, Sarah realized, her legal training recognizing the elegance of the setup. And we failed. No, Margaret smiled gently. You didn't fail. You proved exactly what I needed to know, that you're ready to learn the hardest lesson. Of all, which is? Michael asked. That true inheritance isn't in bank accounts or property deeds. It's in the wisdom to handle both fortune and misfortune with grace. She pulled out the key from her locket. Now, shall we see what your great-grandmother left for you to find? The siblings stood, drawn together by curiosity and something deeper. A shared understanding that they were about to uncover not just their grandmother's secret, but their own capacity for growth, forgiveness, and change. Margaret moved toward the creaking floorboard, the key catching the afternoon light. In that moment, she saw not the adults who had betrayed her trust, but the children who had once gathered in this very room, dreaming of their futures. Perhaps Rose had been right after all. Sometimes the best gifts are the ones we have to wait a lifetime to receive. The antique locket caught a ray of afternoon sunlight as Margaret knelt beside the window in James's old room. Its golden surface bore the scratches and patina of 50 years, a wedding gift from Herbert to Rose, passed down with purpose. The key it held was smaller than a door key, crafted with the delicate precision of another era. Mrs. Wilson? Mrs. Richardson's voice drifted up from downstairs. Is everything all right up there? We heard footsteps. Sarah moved quickly to the door. I'll handle this, she whispered, her legal instincts kicking in. The sound of her heels on the stairs was followed by murmured conversation. Margaret's fingers found the familiar board, third from the window, where James used to prop his easel. Michael knelt beside her, his accountant's eyes studying the worn wood grain. James stood back, arms crossed, paint-stained fingers drumming against his sleeve. I used to hear creaking at night, James said softly. I always thought it was the house settling, but it was you, wasn't it? Checking on the safe? Margaret worked her fingers along the board's edge. Sometimes. Mostly I checked when one of you was in trouble. When Michael's first business failed. When Sarah lost that big case. When you... She glanced at James. When you were struggling with your demons. Each time, I wondered if it was time to open it. Why didn't you? Michael asked, helping her lift the board. We could have avoided so many problems. The wood creaked free, revealing a narrow space beneath. Dust motes danced in the shaft of sunlight that illuminated a small steel door set into the concrete foundation, a professional installation, hidden for decades. Because Rose made me promise, Margaret replied, lifting the locket's chain from her neck. She said, money can't fix a broken spirit, but watching someone rise from rock bottom, that builds character no fortune can buy. Sarah returned, closing the bedroom door behind her. I told them we're documenting items for the estate. Sale. They gave us another hour. She paused, seeing the exposed safe. Is that it? Margaret nodded, inserting the tiny key into the safe's lock. It turned with surprising ease, as if recently oiled. The door swung open silently, revealing a space about 2 feet square. $2 million. Michael breathed, leaning forward. That must be quite a stack of... But instead of stacks of cash, they saw a single USB drive, an envelope thick with documents, and a smaller envelope with Margaret's name written in Rose's elegant hand. What is this? Sarah reached for the documents, her legal training drawing her to the paperwork. Wait. Margaret caught her hand. There's an order to this. Rose was very specific. She picked up the envelope with her name, opened it, and began to read aloud. My dearest Margaret, if you're reading this, then the moment has finally come. The money is there, yes, but not in cash. That would be far too simple a lesson. Instead, you'll find everything needed to access the fortune I've built over 50 years of careful investment. Railroad bonds, stock certificates, property deeds, all converted and grown through decades of patience. Michael's eyes widened at the mention of investments. James sank to the floor, his artist's soul overwhelmed by the magnitude of the moment. Sarah stood perfectly still, attorney's mind cataloging every detail. But here's the catch, my darlings. Margaret continued reading. This inheritance comes with conditions. The USB drive contains videos I recorded before my death, messages for each of you, telling truths you need to hear. The documents include a family covenant that must be signed by all. The money cannot be accessed until both conditions are met. Videos? James whispered. From Great-Grandma Rose? A covenant? Sarah's legal mind was already racing. What kind of conditions? Margaret held up her hand for silence. My dearest grandchildren-to-be, by the time you see this, you will have faced struggles. You will have made mistakes. You may have even broken your mother's heart. But that's precisely why this moment is right. Sometimes we must lose everything. We think we need to find everything we truly deserve. The room fell silent, except for the distant sound of the Richardsons moving boxes downstairs. Margaret lifted the USB drive, holding it up to the light like a precious gem. Well, she said quietly, shall we see what other secrets your great-grandmother left for us? Michael checked his watch. The bank branch nearby has private rooms with computers. We could... No, Margaret interrupted, her voice firm. Rose picked this moment, this room, for a reason. This is where James painted his dreams, where Sarah practiced changing the world, where Michael learned the value of numbers. We'll do this at home, my new apartment, together. She began carefully returning items to the safe, but James stopped her. Mom, wait. There's something else in there. In the back corner. Margaret reached in, her fingers finding a small object wrapped in silk. Unwrapping it revealed a second locket, identical to the one she wore, but newer. For the next generation, she read from the tiny note attached. Because some secrets are meant to be kept, until exactly the right moment to share them. The sound of footsteps on the stairs startled them. Quickly, they replaced the floorboard, erasing all evidence of their discovery. As Mrs. Richardson's shadow appeared in the doorway, Margaret clutched her grandmother's treasures in her pocket, feeling the weight of not just money, but of truth, wisdom, and the chance for her family's redemption. We're almost finished, she told Mrs. Richardson with a calm smile, just gathering a few last memories. The young woman nodded sympathetically, unaware that in this room, at this moment, a family's destiny had just shifted like the afternoon. Shadows across the floor, where a secret kept for decades had finally found its moment to transform 3 lost souls, and the mother who never stopped believing in their redemption. Margaret's new apartment felt strange after 43 years in the house. The furniture seemed out of place, like actors on the wrong stage. She'd taken a small 2-bedroom unit in Cedar Grove Apartments, using part of her savings. The children didn't know about those yet. The living room wall still bore rectangular patches of darker paint, where her family photos had hung for just 2 weeks. Michael set up his laptop on the dining room table, while Sarah spread the documents from the safe across the surface. James paced the small room, pausing occasionally to stare out the window at the unfamiliar view. The safe deposit box key lay in the center of the table, its brass surface gleaming under the overhead light. The USB first, Margaret decided, settling into her chair. Rose was very specific about the order. Michael plugged in the drive, and they waited as his computer recognized the device. A single folder appeared, containing 4 video files. Watch First MP4, and 3 others labeled with their names. Together? Sarah asked, her hand hovering over the trackpad. Margaret nodded. The screen filled with Rose's face, recorded 6 months before her death, but still sharp-eyed and clear-minded at 82. The kitchen of the old house was visible behind her, sunlight streaming through the window where Margaret had spent countless mornings drinking coffee. Hello, my darlings, Rose began, her voice strong despite her age. If you're watching this, then everything has happened exactly as I predicted. The house has been sold. Yes, I knew that would happen eventually. Money has become both the problem and the solution, and Margaret, my wise daughter, has finally opened the safe. James sank into a chair, his artist's sensitivity catching the subtle smile playing at his great-grandmother's lips. First, you should know that I'm not crazy or cruel. This elaborate plan wasn't meant to torture you. It was meant to teach you what my own family learned the hard way. Rose leaned closer to the camera. You see, Herbert, your great-grandfather wasn't just a railroad worker. He was one of the early investors in Western Pacific Railroad, but he saw what sudden wealth did to his brothers, his cousins. Good people destroyed by money they weren't ready to handle. Michael shifted uncomfortably, his gambling debts a weight in his chest. So we kept it secret, built it slowly, invested wisely, and most importantly, we watched our children and grandchildren grow, struggle, succeed, and fail on their own terms. Rose's eyes seemed to meet each of theirs through the screen. Margaret, show them the key. Margaret lifted the safe deposit box key. Box 247, she read from the attached tag. First National Bank, downtown branch. That box, Rose continued as if hearing the words, contains everything you need to access the fortune, now worth approximately $2 million. But before you rush off to the bank, you need to watch your individual messages. And then, only then, read the covenant. Because this inheritance isn't just about money. It's about healing what's broken in each of you. Sarah reached for the legal documents, but Margaret gently moved them aside. One step at a time, dear. Michael. Rose's voice grew softer. My numbers man. So much like Herbert. Brilliant with finances, except when it comes to your own. Your message will help you understand why you've been trying to fill an empty space with gambling. Michael's face paled. Sarah, my fierce advocate, your message will show you why winning isn't everything. And why losing that big case was actually your greatest victory, if you're willing to see it. Sarah's hands clenched beneath the table. And James, my sensitive artist, you've been searching for beauty in all the wrong places, trying to numb the pain instead of using it. Your message will help you understand why your struggles with addiction aren't about weakness. They're about strength you haven't claimed yet. James wiped a tear from his cheek. Margaret, Rose's voice cracked slightly, you've carried this secret so long, protected them so fiercely. Now it's time to let them protect themselves. Let them fall or fly on their own. The screen went dark, leaving them in silence. The safe deposit box key seemed to pulse with possibility in the center of the table. Well, Margaret said quietly, who wants to watch their message first? Michael stood abruptly. I need some air. Running away again? Sarah's voice held an edge. No, James interrupted, surprising them all. He's not running. He's scared. We all are. He looked at his siblings. Great-Grandma Rose is about to tell us truths about ourselves we've been avoiding for years. Maybe we all need a moment to decide if we're ready to hear them. Margaret watched her children. The accountant who couldn't account for his own worth. The lawyer who argued with everyone except her own heart. The artist who painted beauty but couldn't see it in himself. Rose had known them better than they knew themselves. Take an hour, she said, closing the laptop. Walk, think, prepare yourselves. Because once we start this journey, we finish it together. They filed out quietly, leaving Margaret alone in her new apartment. She lifted the safe deposit box key, remembering the day Rose had pressed it into her hand along with the locket. Trust. The timing, Rose had said. Everything breaks so it can be rebuilt stronger. Margaret moved to the window, watching her children emerge from the building. Michael headed toward the park, his usual path when troubled. Sarah pulled out her phone, probably researching inheritance law. James simply sat on the building's front steps, pulling out his sketchbook, his therapy since childhood. The key felt warm in her palm, a weight both heavy and hopeful. In a few hours, they would learn the full truth about their inheritance, about themselves, about the strength that comes from falling and rising together. But first, they each needed to face the hardest audience of all, themselves in Rose's unflinching mirror. Margaret touched her locket, its familiar shape a comfort. Well played, Rose, she whispered to the empty room. Well played indeed. An hour stretched into 2 as Margaret waited in her apartment. When her children finally returned, their faces showed the weight of their private reflections. Michael's tie was loosened, his corporate armor showing cracks. Sarah had removed. Her blazer, looking more like the young girl who used to curl up with law books than the polished attorney she'd become. James's sketchbook was full of new drawings, dark swirling patterns that spoke of inner turmoil. I'll go first, Michael said, his voice rough. "Whatever Gran Rose has to say, I need to hear it." Margaret reopened the laptop, selected Michael's video file, and they watched as Rose's image appeared again. The timestamp showed this recording was made just days before her death. "Michael, my practical dreamer," Rose began, settling into her familiar kitchen chair. "Do you know why you gamble? It's not about the money. It never was. You're trying to feel what your father took from you. The thrill of risk, the rush of victory, the permission to lose control. But Herbert, your great-grandfather, taught me something important about risk. He said, the biggest gamble isn't with money, it's with trust." Michael's hands gripped the edge of the table as Rose continued. "In that safe deposit box, you'll find statements from Morgan Stanley. Account number 2847392, opened in 1962. Herbert's original investment, $10,000 in railroad stocks. Current value, just over $800,000. It's yours, Michael, but..." Rose leaned forward, her eyes piercing through time. "Only after you've attended 6 months of gambling addiction counseling. The account is in trust, with Margaret as executor." Sarah's legal mind was already racing, but Rose wasn't finished. "And before your siblings start calculating their shares, let me be clear. Each of you has a separate account with separate conditions, because each of you needs to heal in your own way." Michael slumped in his chair, tears streaming down his face. "She knew. All this time she knew what I was fighting." Margaret reached for the stack of bank statements she'd retrieved from the safe. "There's more, Michael. Look at the investment pattern over the years. Every time the stocks dipped, Herbert held firm. When others panic sold, he bought more. The real lesson isn't in the money. It's in the patience, the trust in time and wisdom over quick rewards." Sarah was already reaching for her video file, but James caught her hand. "Wait, let's process this first. Michael needs a moment." They watched as their eldest brother, the one who'd always tried to replace their father's strength with his own, finally broke down. "I've lost so much more than money," he whispered. "I've lost years, relationships, self-respect. But you haven't lost family," Margaret said softly. That's what Rose understood. Money comes and goes. But family, real family, holds on through the storms. Sarah's professional facade cracked slightly. "The gambling debts. How bad are they, Michael?" He pulled out a crumpled paper from his pocket, a list he'd made during his walk. 240,000, plus interest. Less than a third of what Rose left you, James observed. "She made sure the cure was bigger than the disease." Michael wiped his eyes. "But I have to earn it. 6 months of counseling, facing all the things I've been running from. You don't have to do it alone," Margaret said, revealing another document from the stack. Rose left a list of recommended counselors. She thought of everything. Sarah was studying the bank statements with growing amazement. These investment notes in the margins, they're like a master class in long-term wealth building. Every decision documented, every lesson learned. "Because it's not just about inheriting money," Margaret explained. "It's about inheriting wisdom." Rose and Herbert spent decades building this legacy, watching the markets, making careful choices. Each account tells a story, not just of wealth, but of patience, perspective, and purpose. James picked up his sketchbook, flipping to a fresh page. His artist's hand began sketching their great-grandmother's face from the video, capturing the knowing look in her eyes. "She's not just giving us money, she's giving us a chance to rewrite our stories." "Sarah?" Margaret gestured to the laptop. "Are you ready for your truth?" The attorney squared her shoulders, but her voice trembled. What if I'm not the person she thought I could be? What if I've already failed too many times?" "That's exactly why you need to watch it," Michael said, finding strength in his sister's vulnerability. "Because Rose saw something in each of us that we've forgotten how to see in ourselves." Margaret loaded Sarah's video file, the bank statements, spread before them like a map of their family's future, a future that would require each of them to face their past, their pain, and the possibility of redemption. As Rose's image appeared again, they drew closer together, understanding that the real inheritance wasn't in the accounts or investments, but in the courage to change and the wisdom to help each other through the process. The afternoon light slanted through Margaret's new apartment windows, casting long shadows across the documents that held their financial salvation. But in that moment, as they prepared to hear Rose's next message, they realized that the greatest wealth wasn't measured in dollars. It was measured in the strength of a family willing to face hard truths together. Rose's face filled the screen again, but this time her expression held a different kind of wisdom. She was sitting in what Sarah immediately recognized as her old law office, filmed during one of her last visits before retirement. The mahogany. Bookshelves behind her still held the leather-bound law volumes Sarah had inherited, now sitting in boxes in her condo's storage unit. "Sarah, my fierce defender of justice," Rose began, her voice gentler than before. "You've spent your life fighting battles for others, but the biggest case you've never won is the one against yourself. That loss last year, the Whitman wrongful death suit, it's eating you alive, isn't it?" Sarah's breath caught. No one in the family knew how deeply that case had affected her. "You think you failed because you lost. But sometimes, my dear, losing a case means justice has actually won." Rose leaned forward, her eyes knowing. "I did some research on the Whitman case. That company you were defending? They deserved to lose. Deep down you knew it. Your guilt isn't from losing the case. It's from almost winning it." Michael and James exchanged glances as their sister's professional composure crumbled. Margaret reached for the old will document from the stack of papers, knowing what was coming next. "In the safe deposit box," Rose continued, "you'll find documentation for account number 3856471, certificates for blue-chip stocks, municipal bonds, and a special investment I made in your name, shares in the Public Justice Foundation. Current. Total value, $600,000. Sarah's legal training kicked in automatically. "But the tax implications are already handled," Rose smiled. "Check the trust documents Margaret has. But here's your condition, counselor. You have to leave corporate law. That brilliant mind of yours, it belongs in public advocacy. The money will transfer only when you've established your own practice focusing on civil rights and public interest. Law." Margaret handed Sarah the will document, its yellow pages crisp with age. Rose added a specific clause about your inheritance, read the highlighted portion. Sarah's hands shook as she read aloud. "To my granddaughter Sarah, I leave not just financial means, but a challenge. To remember that true justice often means standing with the weak against the powerful. Even when, especially when, it costs us something personally." "There's more," Margaret said softly. "Keep reading." The attached letter from Thomas Morrison of Morrison & Wade offers a junior partnership position in their civil rights practice, effective upon Sarah's acceptance of these terms. Mr. Morrison was a dear friend of Herbert's, and his firm has been at the forefront of social justice litigation for 40 years. James leaned forward. "Wait, Morrison & Wade? Aren't they the ones who won that huge discrimination case last year?" Sarah nodded, her throat tight. "They're legendary in civil rights law. I've dreamed of working with them, but their firm only takes lawyers who've proven their commitment to public interest work." She looked up, realization dawning. "Gran Rose arranged this years ago, didn't she?" "Keep reading," Margaret encouraged. Sarah. "We'll find that the investment portfolio includes significant holdings in companies known for ethical business practices and social responsibility. Herbert believed that profit and principal could coexist. The quarterly dividends should more than cover the initial income decrease from transitioning to public interest law." Michael, his own financial burden feeling lighter after his revelation, managed a small smile. "She thought of everything." "Not everything," Sarah whispered, pulling out her phone and bringing up her bank app. "My firm is underwater. I remortgaged my condo to keep us afloat. Even with this inheritance, I'd be walking away from 10 years of building a practice." "Look at the final page," Margaret said. Sarah turned to the last sheet, where a handwritten note from Rose waited. "My dearest Sarah, by now you've calculated all the costs, risks, and losses. That's what good lawyers do. But you haven't calculated the cost of continuing to silence your conscience. Herbert used to say, 'The highest fee we can earn is the privilege of sleeping peacefully at night.' Your condo mortgage? Check the trust documents. There's a separate fund specifically for that. I want you free to follow your heart, not your fears." Tears fell onto the will's pages as Sarah finally let her carefully constructed walls crumble. "I've been so unhappy," she admitted. "Every case, every victory, it felt hollow, like I was winning all the wrong battles. James moved to sit beside his sister, his artist's sensitivity reading the pain in her face. Maybe that's why you pushed so hard to sell Mom's house. Trying to fix everything with practical solutions because the emotional ones were too hard to face. The irony, Michael added, is that we all did that in our own ways. I gambled to feel in control. Sarah buried herself in corporate law to feel successful. And James, he looked at their younger brother. Your message is next. Are you ready? James glanced at the laptop, then at the scattered legal documents that mapped out their inheritance. No, he said honestly, but I don't think we're supposed to be ready. Gran Rose knew that healing doesn't start until we admit we're broken. Margaret gathered the will and trust documents, organizing them with the careful precision she'd learned in her bookkeeping career. Your great-grandmother believed that money could be either medicine or poison. It all depends on the timing and the truth we're ready to face. Sarah wiped her eyes, leaving smudges of mascara on her hands, a crack in her perfect professional appearance that somehow made her look more whole. All those pro bono cases I turned away, the clients I knew, needed help but couldn't afford our fees. You can help them now, Margaret said. Rose and Herbert's legacy isn't just money. It's the chance to become who you were always meant to be. The afternoon had faded into evening, city lights beginning to twinkle beyond the apartment windows. The old will document lay among the other papers, its pages holding not just legal directives, but a carefully crafted path to redemption. As James reached for the laptop, preparing to face his own truth, Sarah stopped him. Wait, she said, pulling out her phone again. Before we go on, I need to make a call to Morrison and Wade before I lose my courage. As Sarah stepped into the kitchen to make the call that would change her life's direction, Margaret saw Rose's wisdom playing out exactly as planned. Sometimes the hardest cases to win are the ones we argue with ourselves, and sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't the money we receive, but the truth we're finally ready to face. Sarah returned from her call looking both terrified and relieved, like someone who had just stepped off the edge of a cliff and found they could fly. The kitchen light caught the tears still drying on her cheeks. They're holding the position. For me, I start in 3 weeks. Before anyone could respond, James stood abruptly. My turn, he said, his voice thick with determination. Before I lose my nerve. Margaret opened the next file on the laptop, but first retrieved a thin manila envelope from her bag. The tab read, Investigative Report, J.W. Wilson, Private Investigations. She set it aside, waiting. Rose appeared on screen, but this time she sat in James's old art studio, surrounded by his early paintings, works he'd thought had been lost in a storage unit auction years ago when he couldn't pay the fees. James, my beautiful soul, Rose began, touching one of his canvases. You see the world through different eyes. That's your gift and your curse. You think your addiction makes you weak, but it's not weakness that drives you to numb the pain. It's the depth of what you feel. James sank deeper into his chair, hands trembling slightly. Michael instinctively reached for his brother's shoulder, but James shook his head. I need to hear this. All of it. These paintings. Rose continued, gesturing to the works around. They're not lost. I bought that storage unit when you couldn't. Every canvas, every sketch. They're in the climate-controlled vault at First National, along with your inheritance. But there's something you need to know about your art. James, something even Margaret doesn't know yet. Margaret's eyes widened slightly as she reached for the investigator's report. 6 months ago, I had an art dealer from New York evaluate your work. Jerome Blackwood. Perhaps you've heard of him? The report is with your inheritance. He valued just 3 of your early pieces at over $200,000 combined. You weren't failing as an artist, James. You were simply looking for validation in all the wrong places. The room fell silent, except for James's sharp intake of breath. Margaret opened the investigator's report, revealing glossy photographs of James's paintings with Blackwood's detailed appraisals attached. Your account, Rose continued, numbers 4729185, currently holds $400,000 in mixed investments, but the real value is in your art. I've arranged for a show at Blackwood's gallery, scheduled for exactly 1 year after you complete an intensive rehabilitation program. Not a quick fix this time. Not an outpatient Band-Aid. Real healing. James's hands went to his face, but Michael gently pulled them away. No hiding, he said softly. Not anymore. The investigators' report laid bare the pattern they'd all tried to ignore. James's 6 attempts at outpatient rehab, each following the same cycle: early success, growing pressure, eventual relapse. But between those cycles were periods of intense creativity, producing works that now carried significant value in the art world. The money isn't just for rehabilitation, Rose explained. It's for after, for studio space, materials, marketing, everything. You need to build a real career. But first, you have to want your own healing more than you want our approval. Margaret pulled another document from the report, a letter of acceptance from Vista Point Recovery Center, dated for the present month, with a note from Rose paperclipped to it. When he's ready, the place will be waiting. How could she know? James whispered. How could she know I'd need this exact program at this exact time? Sarah, still emotional from her own revelation, picked up one of the appraisal photographs. Because she saw you clearly, little brother. More clearly than we did. While we were pushing you to be practical and get a real job, she saw an artist worth investing in. Michael, the numbers man, was studying the appraisals. These valuations. James, do you understand what this means? You're not just talented. You're marketable. These pieces show a progression that collectors look for. But James wasn't looking at the appraisals. He was staring at the paintings themselves, moments of his life captured in color and shadow, the dark swirls of depression, in one corner balanced by bursts of hope in another. His whole story was there on canvas, waiting to be understood. There's more, Margaret said quietly, turning to the final page of the investigator's report. Rose had Mr. Wilson track down every piece of art you sold when you were struggling. She bought them all through intermediaries. Every painting, every sketch. She kept your body of work intact, waiting for you to be ready to reclaim it. The report detailed each purchase: bar owners who'd accepted paintings in lieu of drinking tabs, pawn shops that had undervalued his work, collectors who'd taken advantage of his desperation. Rose had methodically recovered them all. The final condition, Rose's voice drew their attention back to the screen, is that you paint my portrait, not from photographs, from memory, from love. When you can see me as clearly as I've seen you, you'll be ready for everything else this inheritance offers. James reached for his sketchbook, his constant companion through years of struggle. The recent pages were filled with dark, chaotic lines, but he turned to a fresh sheet. With trembling fingers, he began to sketch Rose's face, not as she appeared in the video, but as he remembered her from childhood, sitting in her kitchen, watching him draw, believing in his talent long before he could believe in himself. Vista Point, he said quietly, still sketching. They have an opening next week? Margaret nodded, hope blooming in her chest. Rose already paid for a full year of treatment. Everything's ready, including us, Michael added. We'll be there. This time, James. Really there. Sarah pulled out her phone, already thinking like a public advocate. I'll contact Blackwood's gallery tomorrow. Make sure the show arrangements are still in place. We'll need to review the contract. But James was lost in his drawing, his hands steady for the first time in months. Rose's face emerged on the page, her eyes holding the same wisdom they'd seen in the videos, a wisdom that had seen through their facades to the healing they each needed. Margaret watched her children, the gambler finding his way back to trust, the lawyer rediscovering her conscience, the artist sketching his path to recovery, and understood at last the full scope of Rose's legacy. The money was never the real inheritance. It was the truth that would set them free. The Family Counseling Center occupied a converted Victorian house on Maple Street, its windows warm with afternoon light. Dr. Elena Martinez's office was on the second floor, a comfortable room with well-worn leather chairs arranged in a circle. The counseling intake forms sat in Margaret's lap, Rose's handwriting visible in the margins. She'd filled them out months ago, preparing even for this moment. Rose was my patient too, Dr. Martinez explained, settling into her chair. For 6 months before she passed. She wanted me to understand your family dynamics before this day came. The counseling record lay open on her desk. Wilson family. Generational healing protocol. Rose's influence reached even here, guiding their path to reconciliation. She told me, Dr. Martinez continued, that money would bring you to this room, but healing would keep you here. Shall we begin? Michael sat stiffly in his suit, fresh from his first GA meeting. Sarah had come straight from her resignation meeting at her old firm, still carrying her corporate armor like a shield. James, 3 days into detox at Vista Point, had been granted special permission to attend this first family session. The Naynad. Conditions of your inheritance require 6 family sessions, Dr. Martinez noted, consulting Rose's instructions. But healing can't be measured in hours. So let's start with a simple question. What do you really want to say to each other? The silence stretched until James, perhaps because rehabilitation had already cracked his walls, spoke first. I'm sorry I made you sell the house. My rehab bills, the missed rent payments, the loans I never repaid. Stop, Michael interrupted. My gambling debts were twice what you ever borrowed. I'm the one who pushed hardest for the sale. Sarah's legal training kicked in, organizing facts. Actually, it was my idea first. My firm was sinking. I thought if we sold Mom's house, moved her into something smaller. You all think you forced this decision, Margaret said quietly. But I let it happen. Because Rose taught me something about rock bottom. Sometimes you have to hit it before you can rebuild. Dr. Martinez made a note in the family record. So, each of you carries guilt about the house. But perhaps the house was never really the issue. It was safety, James realized, his artist's insight cutting through pretense. For all of us, Mom made it a safe place to fail, to struggle. Even when Dad left, especially then, Margaret nodded. But safety can become a crutch. Sometimes we need to lose our shelter to find our strength. Dr. Martinez turned to a fresh page in the counseling record. Rose mentioned a concept in our sessions. Inherited wisdom. She believed that some lessons can only be learned through loss. Would anyone like to speak to that? Michael's hands clenched. I always thought I was protecting everyone by handling the finances, like Dad should have done. But I was just controlling things because I couldn't control myself. And I, Sarah added, her voice thick, took on other people's battles because I was afraid to fight my own. While I, James smiled sadly, turned pain into art but couldn't face the pain itself. Margaret watched her children's walls crumbling, remembering Rose's words. The greatest inheritance we can leave is the courage to face our own truth. Dr. Martinez closed the counseling record. This is a good place to pause. Remember, healing isn't linear. Some days we move forward, some days we revisit old wounds, but we keep coming back to this circle, this shared space of truth. As they rose to leave, Michael helped James with his coat, a simple gesture that would have been unthinkable weeks ago. Sarah hugged Margaret, whispering, "I'm sorry," into her mother's shoulder. The afternoon sun painted long shadows through the Victorian windows, but the darkness felt less threatening now. Rose's voice seemed to echo in the room. Sometimes the family we rebuild is stronger than the one we thought we lost. The counseling record held just the first few lines of their healing story, but it was a beginning. And sometimes beginnings are the hardest part of any journey worth taking. The letters arrived within days of each other, like vultures circling wounded prey. Margaret spread them across her small apartment kitchen table, each envelope a different shade of threatening. The first, addressed to Michael, bore the letterhead of Crown City Casino's legal department. The second, for Sarah, came from her firm's biggest corporate client. The third, targeting James, was a handwritten note from his former dealer, somehow discovering his stint at Vista Point. "They're testing us," Margaret murmured, remembering Rose's words about timing. She'd known the vultures would come, had prepared for it in her own way. Michael's letter was the most immediate threat. Final notice. Payment of $240,000 plus accumulated interest due within 72 hours, or legal proceedings will commence. The casino's investigators had traced his employer, threatening to contact the accounting board about his gambling addiction. Sarah's was equally devastating. "In light of your departure, our company will be pursuing legal action regarding potential conflicts of interest in the Harrison case." Her former client wasn't just threatening her career. They were attacking her integrity, the very thing she was trying to reclaim. James's letter was the most insidious. "Remember when the art flowed better with chemical assistance? The gallery. Opening is coming up. Wouldn't want to disappoint all those fancy critics." Margaret gathered the letters, her hands steady despite the storm they represented. Rose's voice seemed to whisper from the locket around her neck. "The vultures always circle before dawn. That's how you know morning is coming. She reached for her phone, sending a simple text to her children. Emergency family meeting. Now. They arrived looking stronger than they had weeks ago, despite the challenges. Michael came straight from his GA meeting, a 30-day chip in his pocket. Sarah had traded her corporate suits for more casual wear, looking younger and lighter. James, on a supervised day pass from Vista Point, brought his sketchbook, filled now with clearer, more honest work. "Don't speak," Margaret said, as they settled around the table. "Just read." She passed each letter to its intended recipient, watching their faces. Michael paled, but his hands remained steady. Sarah's jaw clenched, but her eyes showed determination rather than fear. James read his note, and to everyone's surprise, actually, laughed. "They think they can still control us," he said, ripping the dealer's note into tiny pieces. "They don't understand what we've found." "They're coordinating," Sarah observed, her legal mind shifting from defense to offense. "These threats arriving simultaneously? Not a coincidence." Michael nodded. "The casino must have talked to your client, who probably has connections to—" He trailed off, unwilling to speak the darker elements of James's past. "To my old crowd." James finished for him. "It's okay. We can name the demons now. That's what they teach us in rehab." Margaret watched her children, seeing not their fear, but their growing strength. Rose knew this would happen. That's why the inheritance came with conditions, not just to help you heal, but to help you fight. The counseling sessions, Michael realized. The rehabilitation program, the career change. She was building us a fortress. But not of money, Sarah added, understanding dawning. Of truth. They can't threaten us with exposure if we've already exposed ourselves. James opened his sketchbook to a new drawing. A family portrait started in therapy, showing all of them, with their walls down, their truths visible. "We're stronger broken open than we ever were pretending to be whole." Margaret gathered the threatening letters into a pile. "So, my children, what do we do now?" The silence that followed wasn't of fear, but of determination. They had lost a house but found a home in their shared honesty. The vultures might circle, but this family had finally learned to fly. "We fight," they said in unison, and Margaret saw in their eyes the strength Rose had known was there all along. Sometimes the greatest threats bring out our greatest truths, and the darkest hour truly does come just before dawn. Margaret's journal lay open on the coffee table, its pages filled with her neat bookkeeper's handwriting. She'd started it the day Rose gave her the locket, recording every step of what was to come. Now, as her children gathered in her apartment, for the 4th family therapy session, she knew it was time to share her own part in Rose's master plan. "Before Rose died," Margaret began, turning to a dog-eared page, "she made me promise to write everything down, not just the inheritance details, but the strategy for healing this family. Listen." She read from an entry dated 3 years earlier. "Rose says every family fortune has 3 elements: the money, the timing, and the transformation. The money is the least important part. It's the bait that brings people to their moment of change. The timing must be perfect, when they're ready, to break but not yet broken. The transformation is the real inheritance. You've known everything all along," Sarah realized. "The house sale, our struggles, even these threats. You saw it coming." Margaret nodded, turning pages in her journal. "Rose taught me to watch for the signs." Michael's increasing isolation, Sarah's ethical conflicts, James's deepening addiction. She said, "A mother's heart knows when her children are drowning, but sometimes you have to let them feel the water before they'll learn to swim." She revealed a page filled with contact information: gambling addiction counselors, rehabilitation centers, civil rights law firms. Every resource they'd needed had been researched and vetted years in advance. "But here's what you don't know," Margaret continued, reaching the most recent entries. "I've been building our counterattack against these threats for months. Michael, that casino's predatory lending practices, Sarah's new firm is already investigating them. Sarah, your corporate client's ethical violations. I have documents that James discovered in his old gallery job. Paintings bought with laundered money." Her children leaned forward, seeing their mother in a new light. The quiet bookkeeper had been a strategic general all along, positioning pieces on a chessboard they hadn't even known existed. "James's art show?" Margaret smiled. "It's not just a gallery opening. It's a revelation. Each painting tells part of our story: the addiction, the gambling, the corporate corruption, but also the healing, the truth, the transformation. When the vultures come for us, they'll find themselves exposed instead. She turned to the final pages of her journal, where a detailed timeline mapped out the next 3 months. Rose taught me that healing isn't passive. It's a campaign, a strategic revolution of the heart. Each of you has a role to play. Michael's financial expertise will unravel the casino's predatory patterns. Sarah's legal skills will protect whistleblowers and expose corruption. James's art will give voice to the voiceless, all those broken by the systems we once served. Her children sat in stunned silence, seeing their individual challenges transform into a unified purpose. "But Mom," Michael said softly, "aren't you afraid? These are powerful enemies." Margaret touched her locket, then showed them the journal's final entry, written in Rose's hand. "Perfect love casts out fear, but perfect strategy doesn't hurt either." Rose knew that healing you meant more than just fixing your individual problems, Margaret explained. It meant giving you a purpose bigger than yourselves. The inheritance isn't just about making you whole. It's about helping you make others whole too. She closed the journal, her voice firm. "So now you have a choice. We can play defense, handle these threats separately, protect our own interests, or we can fight back together, use our inheritance to create real change, become the family Rose knew we could be." James picked up his sketchbook, already drawing their moment of decision. Sarah's legal pad filled with strategic notes. Michael's calculator app opened to run numbers for a different kind of bottom line. "Together," they said, and Margaret saw in their eyes the same fire that had burned in Rose's when she'd first shared her vision of their redemption. She touched her journal one last time, adding a final entry. "Today, my children chose to inherit not just Rose's money, but her mission. The transformation begins." The courthouse archive room smelled of old paper and dust, but to Sarah, it now felt like home. She'd spent the past week here, building their case, when Mrs. Eleanor Peterson, their former next-door neighbor of 40 years, appeared between the towering shelves of records. "I've been waiting for you to find me," Eleanor said, placing a worn leather folder on the research table. "Rose asked me to hold on to this until the right moment. She called it ammunition for the siege." The folder contained Eleanor's notarized testament, along with statements from 24 neighbors, former customers from Margaret's bookkeeping business, and even James's old art teachers. Each document had been carefully collected and preserved, building a wall of community support around the family. Eleanor's own statement began, "For 40 years, I watched the Wilson family from across the fence. I saw Margaret raise those children. Alone, saw Rose guide them from the shadows. What happened in that house wasn't just a family story. It was a testament to the power of unconditional love." Sarah's hands trembled as she read accounts from people she'd known all her life. Mr. Chen from the corner market wrote about Michael helping him reorganize his books every tax season, free of charge. Mrs. Rodriguez from the dance studio detailed how Sarah had helped her fight eviction from her practice space. The high school art teacher described finding James's early paintings in her classroom, works that had inspired other troubled students to express their pain through creativity. "We're all connected," Eleanor explained, settling into a chair. "Rose understood that healing a family sometimes takes a village. She asked us to be ready when the time came." Sarah called her brothers and mother. Within an hour, they gathered around the archive room table, reading testimony after testimony. Michael found statements from former gambling addicts he'd quietly helped during his own struggles. James discovered letters from gallery owners who'd witnessed his talent battling his demons. "But this," Eleanor said, pulling out a final document, "this is what Rose wanted you to see most." It was a petition, signed by over 100 community members, opposing the casino's expansion plans that had specifically targeted vulnerable neighborhoods. "Your fight isn't just yours," Eleanor continued. "That casino that's threatening Michael, they've destroyed dozens of families in our community. The corporate client pressuring Sarah, they've been pushing out small businesses for years. And, James, dear, your art speaks for so many who've faced the same demons." Margaret watched her children absorb this wider perspective, seeing their personal battles transform into a community cause. Rose's strategy was revealing its final layer, Individual healing multiplied through collective action. The Richards family, Eleanor added, meaning the new owners of their old house, they want to help too. They've offered their home for a community meeting. Imagine, the house you thought you lost becoming the headquarters for your biggest fight. James opened his sketchbook, beginning to draw the scene. Not just their family now, but a web of connections, each line representing a life touched, a story shared, a battle fought together. Rose knew, Margaret said softly, touching her locket. She knew we'd need more than money to win this fight. We'd need witnesses, allies, a community willing to stand with truth. Michael's financial mind was already calculating the impact. With this many witnesses, the casino's intimidation tactics won't stand a chance, Sarah finished, her legal training finding new purpose. Not against a united community. Eleanor gathered her things to leave but paused. Rose told me to remind you. A tree stands strongest, not because of its trunk, but because of its roots in the community that feeds it. As their old neighbor departed, the family sat surrounded by testimonies of lives touched, battles shared, and hope preserved. The archive room's dust motes danced in the afternoon light, each one carrying a fragment of truth that would help them rebuild not just their family, but their community. Margaret looked at her children, Michael planning community financial, literacy workshops, Sarah drafting a class action lawsuit, James sketching concepts for a community art therapy program, and saw Rose's legacy expanding beyond anything they'd imagined. Sometimes the strongest allies are the ones who've been watching all along, waiting for the moment when their truth could help light the way home. The First National Bank's private viewing room felt too small for such a momentous revelation. Margaret and her children gathered around the sleek conference table, where a bank officer had set up a laptop to play the final video from Rose's safe deposit box. Unlike the previous messages, this one was labeled simply, "The full truth, to be viewed only when ready. The timing has to be perfect," Margaret remembered Rose saying. Now, with Michael 6 months sober, Sarah preparing for her first civil rights case, and James creating powerful work in recovery, that moment had finally arrived. Rose's face filled the screen, but this time she sat in Herbert's old study, surrounded by the financial records and legal documents that had built their legacy. Her expression held both gravity and gentle humor. "My darlings," she began, "if you're watching this, then everything has happened exactly as I hoped. The house has been sold, the secrets revealed, the healing begun. But there's one final truth you need to understand." She lifted an old leather ledger, its pages yellow with age. Herbert didn't just invest in railroads. He invested in people. Every stock certificate, every bond, every investment was chosen not just for profit, but for purpose. We built our fortune by backing companies that treated workers fairly, that lifted communities, that chose ethics over easy money. Michael leaned forward, his financial mind racing. The portfolio patterns. "Yes, Michael," Rose smiled, anticipating his realization. "That's why I left you the Gambling Addiction Research Foundation funds. Every investment you'll oversee helps people escape the trap you've survived. Sarah, your civil rights law fund? Built from companies that fought segregation when it cost them dearly to do so. And James, the art therapy programs your endowment supports. They began with Herbert buying paintings from struggling artists during the Depression." Margaret watched, her children's faces as understanding dawned. The inheritance wasn't just money. It was a mission spanning generations. "But here's what you don't know yet," Rose continued, opening the ledger. "Every time your mother checked the safe, every time she worried about telling you too soon, she was protecting more than money. She was protecting your chance to discover your own strength. Margaret, show them the locket now." With trembling fingers, Margaret opened her grandmother's locket. Inside, behind the key, was a tiny folded paper she'd never revealed. On it, in Herbert's handwriting, "The greatest inheritance is the courage to put love above fear." "You see," Rose explained, her eyes twinkling, "Herbert and I had a choice when we built this fortune. We could give our descendants money, or we could give them purpose. We chose both, but we knew the purpose had to come first. The house you sold? I practically orchestrated it. Those threats you're facing? I laid groundwork for years to help you fight them. Sarah gasped softly, her legal mind connecting dozens of dots. The community support wasn't coincidence, Rose nodded. Every neighbor who stood with you, every ally who's emerged. They're part of a network Herbert and I built over decades. People who understand that true wealth isn't in bank accounts, but in the courage to stand for something larger than yourself. James had begun sketching rapidly, capturing the moment his great-grandmother's master plan finally became clear. Michael pulled out his phone, scrolling through investment records with new understanding. Sarah's legal pad filled with notes, seeing how each separate piece fit into a larger pattern of justice. My darlings, Rose concluded, you thought the inheritance was the money, then you thought it was the healing, but it's more than both. It's the chance to continue a legacy of change that began long before you, and will continue long after. The $2 million? That's just the seed. What you grow from it, that's the real inheritance. The video ended, but its impact filled the room like sunlight after a storm. Margaret watched her children absorbing this final revelation, seeing them not as beneficiaries, but as torchbearers. Mom, Michael said softly, you knew, all along? Margaret touched her locket, feeling the weight of generations. I knew we came from a line of people who believed money without meaning is poverty in disguise. Everything else you had to discover for yourselves. In the bank's pristine viewing room, surrounded by the trappings of conventional wealth, the Wilson family finally understood their true inheritance. The courage to transform personal healing into public purpose, private pain into communal power, and family legacy into lasting change. In Dr. Martinez's office, now familiar after months of therapy, the new family agreement lay on the coffee table. Unlike typical legal documents, this one began with a preamble. In Rose's handwriting, wealth without purpose is poverty of the soul. Sign this only if you're ready to inherit not just fortune, but responsibility. The afternoon sun streamed through the Victorian windows as each family member reviewed their sections of the covenant. Michael, now 8 months sober, studied the financial stewardship clauses with clear eyes. It's brilliant, he said, tracing the carefully crafted language. The Gambling Addiction Foundation isn't just funded, it's structured to grow through community investment. Every person who recovers becomes part of the support network for others. Sarah, wearing a Morrison & Wade pin on her blazer lapel, nodded at the legal framework. The Civil Rights Fund operates the same way. Each case we win creates resources for the next battle. Rose and Herbert didn't just leave us money. They left us a perpetual motion machine for social change. James, looking healthy and focused after completing rehabilitation, added his artist's perspective. The art therapy programs, the gallery spaces for recovering addicts, the community workshops, they're all connected. Every piece supports the others. Margaret watched her children discovering the intricate web of purpose Rose and Herbert had woven. The agreement wasn't just a legal document. It was a blueprint for transformation. Dr. Martinez, who had helped Rose craft the psychological aspects of the covenant, opened her notes. Before you sign, let's acknowledge what this commitment means. This isn't just about managing money. It's about continuing a legacy of healing, starting with yourselves. Michael spoke first, his voice steady. I commit to running the financial literacy programs, sharing my story of addiction and recovery. No more hiding behind spreadsheets. I'll be the face of change I needed to see. Sarah set down her legal pad. I pledge to take on cases that matter, not just cases that pay, starting with the class action suit against the casino's predatory practices. Rose showed me that true justice is about transformation, not just transaction. James closed his sketchbook, his latest sketches showing healing hands lifting others up. I commit to making art that speaks truth, running workshops for recovering addicts, showing others that creativity can be the purest form of recovery. Margaret lifted her locket, now understanding it as more than just a key holder. And I commit to being not just your mother, but your partner in this mission. Rose taught me that sometimes love means letting go, so that purpose can take hold. Agreement held specific requirements for each of them. For Michael, monthly financial workshops for gambling addicts, transparent accounting of all foundation activities, and continued participation in GA while mentoring others. For Sarah, pro bono hours dedicated to community cases, establishment of a legal clinic for vulnerable populations, and regular speaking, engagements about corporate accountability. For James, art therapy sessions for rehabilitation centers, quarterly exhibitions featuring recovering artists, and maintenance of his own recovery through creative expression. For Margaret, oversight of the overall mission, community coordination, and preservation of Rose and Herbert's documentary evidence for future generations. Dr. Martinez watched as each family member signed, not just their names, but their commitment to a purpose larger than themselves. Rose believed that healing multiplies when we help others heal. This agreement isn't a constraint. It's a constellation of opportunities. To prove her right, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the Victorian windows, the Wilson family added their final signatures to the document that would guide their future. But this time, the weight of responsibility felt like wings, instead of chains. Margaret gathered the signed agreement, feeling Rose's presence in every carefully crafted clause. She used to say, "Money can build buildings, but purpose builds legacies." Today, we're not just accepting an inheritance, we're becoming inheritors of hope. The family agreement, now complete, represented more than legal obligations. It was a map for their continued healing, a blueprint for community transformation, and a promise to the past that the future would be built on foundations of purpose, not just prosperity. The renovation plans for the old Anderson building spread across what would soon become the Wilson Community Center's main conference table. The historic 3-story structure, just 2 blocks from their former home, had been vacant for years, until Michael discovered its potential during his research into community investments. Rose and Herbert owned this building through a trust, Michael explained, pointing to the original deed. They bought it 40 years ago, waiting for the right moment for us to transform it. The architectural drawings showed their shared vision. First floor, a financial literacy center and legal aid clinic. Second floor, art therapy studios and gallery space. Third floor, counseling rooms and community meeting areas. The basement would house archives documenting local families' struggles and triumphs, starting with their own story. Sarah stood at the windows which faced their old house. The Richardsons were right all along. They didn't just buy a home, they became part of the plan. Their weekly community meetings helped us connect with so many people who needed these services. James worked on a mural design for the entrance hall, a tree with roots made of joined hands, its branches reaching toward hope. His 6 months of sobriety showed in the steady lines and clear vision of his work. Each branch represents a different path to healing, he explained. Financial, legal, creative, emotional, all growing from the same root of community support. Margaret watched her children working together, remembering Rose's words. A family that heals together has the power to heal others. The renovation wasn't just about the building. It was about renovating broken systems, broken lives, broken trust. Michael's Gambling Addiction Foundation had already helped 3 families restructure crushing casino debt. His weekly financial literacy workshops, taught alongside other recovering addicts, filled every session. We're not just teaching budgeting, he said, reviewing the center's financial projections. We're teaching self-worth. Sarah's legal aid clinic had won its first victory against the casino's predatory practices, setting precedent for future cases. Her corporate law expertise, once used to protect wealthy clients, now served to expose systematic exploitation. Every case creates a pathway for someone else's justice, she explained, pinning another success story to the planning board. James's art therapy programs attracted both struggling addicts and established artists, creating a space where creativity and recovery flowed together. His own paintings, documenting his journey from darkness to light, would anchor the center's first exhibition. Art doesn't just express healing, he said, adding detail to the mural design. It becomes healing. Margaret touched her locket, now holding a new key, to the center's front door. Rose and Herbert didn't just leave us money, she reflected. They left us a mission. Every investment they made was a seed planted for this moment. The renovation plans included details that showed how deeply Rose had understood their potential. The financial center's private counseling rooms were designed to feel safe, not shameful. The legal aid clinic's waiting area would display James's artwork, offering hope while people waited for help. The art therapy studios featured large windows, letting creativity and light flow together. "Look at this," Sarah called, discovering a note in Rose's handwriting tucked into the original building plans. "Sometimes the greatest renovation isn't of buildings, but of hearts. Start with your own." They gathered around their mother as she unlocked a closet that hadn't been opened in decades. Inside, they found more of Rose's careful documentation, photographs of the neighborhood's evolution, letters from families who'd faced similar struggles, journals recording the quiet acts of help that had built their community. "We're not just renovating a building," Margaret said, touching the worn papers. "We're continuing a legacy of transformation that Rose and Herbert began long ago." The afternoon light slanted through dusty windows that would soon sparkle with new purpose. Michael's calculator app showed healthy projections for sustainable community impact. Sarah's legal briefs outlined expanding services to meet growing needs. James's sketches captured the spirit of renewal that would soon fill these halls. The renovation plans were more than blueprints for construction. They were maps for rebuilding lives, restoring hope, and proving that the greatest inheritance isn't what we receive, but what we give back to others. 1 year after discovering Rose's inheritance, the Wilson family gathered in their community center's boardroom to sign the final version of their family trust document. Outside, autumn painted the trees in the same golden hues as that day Margaret had stood in their old driveway, clutching hospital discharge papers and carrying the weight of secrets in her locket. The trust document, elegantly bound in blue leather, represented far more than the original $2 million. Through careful management and community investment, they had already grown the foundation's resources while touching hundreds of lives. The Wilson Family Legacy Trust, Margaret read from the first page, dedicated to the proposition that true wealth lies in the transformation of lives. Below these words, Rose's original mission statement had been preserved. "Money is the seed, but purpose is the harvest." Michael, now celebrating 15 months of sobriety and running the city's most successful gambling addiction recovery program, reviewed the financial structuring. The trust is designed to grow through social impact investing. Every person who recovers, every case we win, every artist who finds their voice, they become part of our expanding circle of change. Sarah, having just won a landmark case against predatory lending practices, added her legal perspective. The governance structure ensures the mission can never be diluted. Future generations of our family can inherit responsibility for the trust only if they demonstrate commitment to its core purpose of community healing. James, his art therapy programs now serving 5 rehabilitation centers, touched the trust's cover. His latest exhibition, Paths to Light, had received national attention for its powerful depiction of recovery journeys. We've included a requirement that half the board must always consist of community members who've experienced transformation through our programs. Margaret opened her locket, now containing both Rose's key and a small USB drive documenting their first year of impact. Rose and Herbert didn't just leave us money. They left us a template for meaningful change. This trust ensures their vision continues beyond us. The document included detailed provisions, annual funding for addiction recovery services, scholarships for public interest law, grants for therapeutic arts programs, community leadership development, documentation and research of effective healing practices, but more importantly, it contained stories, testimonials from lives touched, lessons learned, wisdom gained. Each success created ripples of hope that would touch future generations. "Sign with your hearts, not just your hands," Margaret said, echoing Rose's words from long ago. As they added their signatures, they weren't just committing assets to a trust. They were pledging to continue a legacy of transformation that had begun decades ago with a railroad worker and his wife who believed that true wealth lay in the courage to help others heal. Outside, the community center hummed with activity: addiction recovery meetings, legal aid consultations, art therapy sessions. Inside, a family completed their own journey from inheritance to impact, understanding at last that the greatest legacy isn't measured in dollars, but in lives transformed. Margaret closed the trust document, feeling Rose's presence in every carefully crafted clause. The locket around her neck held old secrets and new promises, linking past to future through the power of purposeful love. The new family photograph hung in the Wilson Community Center's entrance hall, positioned beside James's mural of the healing tree. In the image, Margaret sat in Rose's old kitchen chair, now restored and placed in the center's main meeting room. Her children stood behind her, Michael confident and clear-eyed in his recovery, Sarah wearing her public advocate's determination with pride, James holding his artist's brushes like badges of honor. Around them gathered a dozen community members whose lives had been touched by their programs, each face telling its own story of transformation. Margaret's locket caught the light in the photograph, just as Rose's had in family pictures from decades past. But now it held new purpose: a key to the community center, a USB drive of healing stories, and the eternal reminder that love's greatest power lies in its ability to multiply through giving. Rose and Herbert's legacy lived on, not just in the trust documents and investment accounts, but in every life restored, every battle won for justice, every artwork that spoke of hope. The house they'd thought they'd lost had become a door to something greater, a home for healing that would touch generations to come. Sometimes, Margaret thought, touching her locket, the greatest inheritance isn't what we receive, but what we become worthy of passing on.